Hello, I hope you're having a wonderful day. My name is Shelby Riles and I work with Community Health Works. Today, our topic of discussion is vaping. The goal of the presentation today is that you'll walk away knowing what vaping really does to you. Vaping is not all about inhaling yummy flavored air, which the companies that make them market them as. Vaping is associated with numerous health risks and is getting so many people addicted. Nothing about vaping is glamorous, and we hope you'll see that through our thorough dive into the topic today. We're going to get started by going over some common myths associated with vaping. The first one comes from the companies that manufacture them, and they say that vaping is safe, which is extremely far from the case, which you will see shortly. The second myth is that vapes are flavored water. Also, not the case. Vapes contain oil as a base. We'll get into the ingredients a little more pretty soon, but it's not water. The third one is that vaping doesn't hurt others, which is also not true. It does affect others. If someone is to vape in close proximity to you, you will inhale those same chemicals. Not to the same extent as the person who inhaled it firsthand, but you will receive secondhand vape smoke. The last myth we want to go over is that some people believe that vaping is not addictive, and that's also not the case. Vaping is extremely addictive as vapes contain nicotine and some contain other substances as well. Just to cover some of the basics in case you don't know, vapes can come in a lot of different shapes and sizes, but most modern day vapes are small. They're designed to resemble everyday objects like USB drives, pens, erasers, and even lipstick. Their size allows them to be easily concealed, which is why there are currently issues in many school systems with students concealing vapes and bringing them to school. These are just some depictions of different types of vapes here. And so because all vapes operate the same way, this is a pretty good depiction for you to understand it basically. Um, there are four different main components of a vape: a tank, the tip, the atomizer, and the battery, and you can read here what each of their functions are. One thing that's important to note is that faulty batteries from dodgy companies can lead to explosive incidences. Um, there have been a handful of cases where individuals have had malfunctions with their vape while they've been using it and received injury as it exploded near their face, which of course is not a pleasurable experience. So you can remember every vape that's pictured here is operated kind of similarly to the depiction we just saw, if not the same. Each of these will deliver nicotine to the body, will get you addicted to it. So we're going to chat a little bit about that mysterious e-juice inside of these cigarettes. So if it's not water, it's made of oil. Let's talk about that. E-liquids, at bare minimum, are composed of three main ingredients. There's flavors, there's sweeteners, and there's solvents. You can see here on the left kind of a mysterious looking bottle with each labeled. Solvents are substances that are used to dissolve other things in them. Usually nicotine or marijuana if it's a THC vape. Whatever is being put into the vape gets dissolved into that oil substance, the solvent. Those are most commonly vegetable oil or like propylene glycol, and that's like a syrupy liquid, kind of like fog smoke. Flavors are obviously the flavor that's added, and sweeteners add some sweetness. So say they put some like sugar or something. It's not literally sugar, but you can get the picture. The sweetener and the flavoring are used to mask that harsh taste of nicotine. So, to summarize, instead of inhaling a sweet water vapor or flavored air, you're really inhaling heated oil that's been filled with sweetness to mask the nicotine they've dissolved into it, or God knows what else they've put into it. So you might wonder, what are some of the things that they might be putting into vapes? To start, those flavor chemicals we just brought up, the flavorings aren't actually, say you get a blueberry one, there's not blueberries in that vape. The flavor chemicals are chemicals. Vegetable glycerin, like we said, it's kind of like the vegetable oil, that's the solvent. And propylene glycol, that's another commonly used solvent. It's a lot like stage smoke, similar composition. It's more syrupy than the vegetable glycerin. Of course, nicotine. That's the whole shtick here is vaping gives you nicotine, which gives you nicotine rush, whatever. Um, yeah, that one's self-explanatory. And same with marijuana, similarly. Heavy metals. So this is something that surprised me when I first learned it, but there have been heavy metals found in vapes. Think like lead, nickel, and tin. Those are heavy metals. And ultrafine particles, these are extremely, extremely small. You can't see them with the naked eye. You need a microscope, but these are larger than, like, think an oxygen. It's larger than oxygen. And so when you breathe it in, it does damage to your lungs by causing little tiny tears because the particle is too big for your lungs. It's not oxygen, nitrogen. It's not like a gas. It's a particle that's in the air. Formaldehyde, this can also be found in vapes. It has been. Of course, that is not at all something that is safe for consumption in any way. Acetaldehyde, similar thing, that's another chemical. Acrolein, same thing. And volatile organic compounds. And these are similar to ultrafine particles, but are typically larger than ultrafine particles. They act similarly to them as they cause damage in the lungs. And so this quote here is by the Flavor and Extract Manufacturers Association, the group of companies who make the flavor chemicals, and they don't support the use of flavors in vaping products because of a lack of safety assessments. It's basically not regulated to the fullest extent that it should be. And this is a little data note that between 2013 and 2021, the poison centers in the US received just close to 30,000 calls due to e-liquid overexposure. So someone had inhaled a vape to the extent that that oil and whatever else, you can see here the different things that can be in a vape. They essentially consumed too much of that and their body went into a toxic state and they were struggling, of course. So here are a couple of studies that are good to point out in terms of what are the effects of vaping. Well, the top one is one that's posted by Stanford Medicine, and it's linking heart disease to e-cigarette use. It's an early article, so this is something we will likely see in our lifetimes is more on this topic, as well as this one on the bottom by Science News. It's by the American Thoracic Society, published on Science News, excuse me. And it says that widely used e-cigarette flavoring impairs lung function. And of course, you can find these online and read these yourself. But there are two really good ones that point to what the health effects really might be from vaping. Vaping is still a pretty new thing in the grand scheme of things, and so science hasn't had time to effectively study, what is somebody who vapes their entire life, what are their health complications, because it's not been around for an entire lifetime. We don't have studies on that because not enough time has passed for it. So now we're at the part of the presentation where we're going to discuss nicotine addiction and how that affects the body, how that really works. So nicotine activates the reward circuit of the brain. The reward circuit is something that everybody has. It's the feeling of reward which motivates a person to repeat a behavior that activates that reward circuit. So let me put this a little differently. Say you are somebody that enjoys chocolate. I know I enjoy chocolate. You eat chocolate and you feel good after eating chocolate because it tasted good, you enjoyed it. It was a pleasurable experience. Then you think to yourself, that chocolate was good, I'm going to have more chocolate. And so that's kind of the same concept when we talk about nicotine addiction. And that's what we're about to see here. So now we're going to cover the cycle of addiction. Nicotine addiction begins when someone inhales nicotine through vaping. Then it travels to the brain, where it activates nicotine receptors, and that leads to the release of dopamine. That's what causes that pleasurable feeling and activates the reward circuit. That's what you see here. And then those levels of dopamine decrease, and you start to feel maybe a little anxiety or stress. And because you're uncomfortable, you take another hit of the vape. And this is kind of how nicotine addiction continues and pushes forward, because you can quit at one moment, but then you experience withdrawal symptoms and your strength and your willpower deteriorate as you feel physically uncomfortable, physically and mentally uncomfortable. And so that's why it's really important, if you're somebody that does not vape, to not get into this kind of habit, because once you form an addiction to nicotine, that's an entire beast to deal with. And I don't wish that on any of you. So this leads me to the big question. Are you addicted? Are you somebody that vapes or uses cigarettes or is addicted to anything? Any addiction functions that same way, and specifically today we're talking about vaping. So if you are somebody that is addicted to vaping, keep listening. If you maybe do vape and you aren't so sure if you're addicted necessarily, then this slide is for you. So these are some common symptoms of withdrawal, nicotine withdrawal, which is also the symptoms of just general withdrawal when applied generally to any addiction. So if you're having a bad mood, you feel annoyed and nervous and anxious when you can't hit your vape. You can't focus. You have difficulty concentrating on tasks when you can't do that same thing. Morning and night, you have cravings to do it. You'll wake up and you'll want to hit your vape. Right? The last thing you have to do before you go to bed is hit your vape. Maybe you wake up in the middle of the night and you hit your vape. It's maybe you're feeling a loss of control, like you can't go anywhere without it, or you feel like it's hard. And that plays in a little bit to clingy. You can't go anywhere without your vape, or you can't go a day without taking a little bit of it. And then high risk. So if you see this presentation and continue to vape, you understand the consequences and are disregarding them. Um, yeah. So this slide, we're going to go over a little bit to understand how much nicotine is reasonably in a vape. Now, these numbers are a little rough, but they're the best that we can get to in terms of really comparing, because vapes come, like we've said, in all different shapes and sizes. They're made by different manufacturers. We can't guarantee what every single vape is going to exactly have in it, because like we've said, these companies aren't regulated to the degree that they're meant to be. But they can be used as a good general reference. So to start, we have a pack of cigarettes. That's 20 milligrams of nicotine. And we're comparing that, of course, to 20 cigarettes, because that's one pack. And then we get to a Juul pod, which were really popular a few years ago. I remember a lot of my peers had them. I don't know if they're as widely used today, but they're a good reference as well, as that equivalents to about 41 cigarettes in terms of nicotine. A puff bar has about 50 milligrams. Those are like maybe your equivalent of a cheap disposable vape. And those are about 50 cigarettes of nicotine inside. And that's, remember, the nicotine. And then a pod, one of the bigger tank models of a vape, about 90 milligrams of nicotine, and that equates to 90 cigarettes. So one of the big themes of this presentation that I hope you're starting to realize is that big vape actually isn't just like big tobacco. It is big tobacco. Big tobacco companies are the same companies that manufacture vapes, the same ones that said smoking was safe, even though they knew the health risks. And so that leads us here to the known effect of smoking cigarettes. Here we have a healthy lung and we have a lung that has been damaged heavily from heavy cigarette smoking. And I like to show this because of the point that we just went over, that the big tobacco companies and the big vape companies are the same. And the only thing that they're really interested in is making a profit, of course. So it's just something to keep in mind when we consider the health effects of vaping. And so here we're going to go over potential harmful effects of vaping. Now, like I said earlier in the presentation, science is not to a point where we can directly pull an article for every single potential risk factor. But in understanding how vapes affect the body short term, how the body's affected when you first inhale them, and based on current research, we can conclude that these are potential harmful effects. So to start off with the brain, of course your brain is affected. That's where the reward circuit is even taking place. But we have to even consider the effect on the receptors as the nicotine is, of course, binding and unbinding, the feelings of withdrawal. It all plays together. So, of course, the nicotine addiction. And then anxiety, as we kind of discussed with withdrawal, that's a symptom of that. Same with depression, restlessness, maybe you're not sleeping well, headaches as well, and dizziness, as well as confusion. And attention problems, of course. These are, of course, a variety of different things that can take place. Seizures are, while I will say unlikely, not impossible. And same with tremors. There have been instances of both being linked to vaping use. And learning and mood disorders also have a correlation as well, and it can aggravate individuals that might have a disorder of those natures. The next area to consider is the eyes. They can become irritated easily, you can have blurry vision, and in the mouth, you can have irritation and gum disease, and oral cancer maybe is in effect as well. You've got to consider when you're putting those propylene glycol, the vegetable glycerin, remember those are the solvents we talked about. And remember all of the different things that the companies can put into those solvents. And so you got to think if you're coating your mouth down to your lungs, coating your lungs with that material, over time, there are effects that will inevitably take place, whether that is as simple as your mouth gets dry or maybe your throat is irritated to later in life developing cancer of sorts. And then, of course, the throat, it's similar to the mouth in that you can get a sore throat, you can develop throat cancer. I mean, those are logical conclusions to draw over long-term use of depositing various materials, as we went over earlier, to those areas of the body. And then, of course, the star of the show when it comes to health effects associated with vaping is, of course, the lungs. You can have rapid, shallow breathing. You can have coughing, wheezing, permanent lung damage even, as well as lung disease and lung cancer. Now, we've got to think too about when all of that stuff is being deposited into the lungs, you're sucking that down in there. And of course, you are exhaling it, but you've got to think about everything that juice, so to speak, it's not juice, it's e-liquid, coats. That layer inevitably also builds up. So it's something to think about, of course, when we're talking about the rapid shallow breathing, the coughing, your lung your lung capacity and your airways are being compromised because you are vaping. And so that can lead to difficulty breathing at times. Maybe you go upstairs and you have more trouble catching your breath than usual over time. Maybe you feel like you can't get enough air down. I mean, there's very different ways that this can manifest, but inevitably there are effects on the lungs from vaping. And of course, important to note is potential effects on the heart as well as the arteries. So with the heart, there's increased risk of heart attack, increased risk of stroke, chest pain. In the arteries, there's increased blood pressure and increased risk of heart attack. And of course, those two kind of go together because your heart and your bloodstream are related. And so the reason why this is because your lungs, when you breathe oxygen in, it deposits oxygen into the bloodstream. Well, when you vape, when you breathe in the chemicals we discussed, those also will go into the bloodstream. And over time, that has a reasonable effect, as well as the fact that there's an immediate effect in that your hands might get cold, your blood flow might decrease. It's just there's short-term and long-term effects to consider when we think about the effects on the heart and the arteries as well. Oh, and of course, increased risk of stroke, as is listed under heart as well. We should consider the effects to our stomach and our digestive system, as vaping can lead to vomiting, nausea, and abdominal pain. Now, this is to be considered in the meaning that when you inhale the e-liquid, of course, that deposits into your mouth. And your mouth, when you swallow your saliva, how what have you, when you drink water, inevitably the e-liquid in your mouth will be digested. And over time, one, you can digest a certain amount that might cause adverse effects to your stomach and digestion, or you can consider the e-liquid when you first ingest it could have an adverse reaction with your stomach, as your stomach may not agree with the liquid. And then the other thing to consider is that your immune system is inevitably going to be compromised if you vape. Your risk of infections is increased significantly, as it is with the traditional smoker. So, in essence, vaping harms your body. There are many potential effects and many effects that are currently being studied. And as a recap, these are the different parts of the body that we just discussed. However, this is not an all-inclusive list of potential areas of the body that might be affected by vaping. So the choice is yours. Remember, we looked at the lungs, comparing the effects of someone who smoked cigarettes for their entire life to the otherwise healthy lung. You can choose whether your lungs will be a good example in, say, 50 years, say 30 years, say 80 years, however old you may be. If you vape in your life, and depending on how long you do that, of course, will your lungs be an example that we can use at that time to say this is what vaping does, just as we can do with cigarettes here? Something to think about. And I hope you enjoyed this presentation. And remember the various different types of vapes that we discussed, e-liquids, the cycle of addiction, and potential effects on the body. We covered a lot of ground today. So if you have any questions, feel free to contact us. You can check out our website where the material that we just covered is covered in different blog posts. We also have our social medias attached here to this link tree, and of course, you're welcome to give us a call or an email. Thank you so much, and have a great day.